everyone! Welcome to another updated guide in my Druid series. This time I would like to explain all possible build variations in regard to skills, traits, pets, and gear. What you decide to run on each boss can make you much more or much less effective depending on your choices. But I don't want to give you a long list of what to play on every single boss in the game. Instead, I'll present what options exist and examples of bosses where they can be good, and I'll explain the thought process you should follow when choosing the build. I don't believe there exist universal builds that work the same everywhere and for everyone. You might think that you should bring as much CC as possible on bosses with big break bars, but if your group already has very good CC without you, then it makes more sense to think what other useful utility you can bring instead. Always keep context in mind. Don't adapt just to the boss, but also to your specific group. Let's start with skills. You always bring Sun Spirit for might uptime and ramp up. Then, to ensure 100% protection uptime, you need to bring two sources of it between your heal skill and utility skills. Either one glyph and Stone Spirit, or two glyphs. Realistically, you'll always be running Stone Spirit because Aegis is nice, but do keep in mind that swapping it out for a glyph is an option. As for your elite skill, most of the time you will be running Glyph of the Stars. As I've mentioned in my previous guide, it always heals, gives stability, and also protection through the Verdant Etching trait. Outside of CA, it's also a pulsing Condi cleanse in addition to that, while using it in CA makes it a pulsing res instead. In some situations, you might want to swap it out for Entangle. You should definitely bring it for Seeker Control if you're tanking Veil Guardian in the middle. On the side, it's optional. Some people like it for Gorseval adds, but CA5 is usually sufficient there. It's not very good if for immobilizing Prides on Deimos, however, because of its long cooldown. I recommend Jacaranda there. Next, let's talk about your healing skill choice. Glyph of Rejuvenation is the strongest burst heal in your kit. When used inside CA, it will heal your allies a lot and you yourself a bit less. When used outside of CA, the opposite will happen. It will heal you a lot and your allies a bit less. This makes it an absolutely invaluable skill on bosses where you take a lot of damage from certain mechanics, such as Veil Guardian. Used inside CA, this glyph alone can be enough to heal up your subgroup back to full after a grain hit. Another situation where a glyph can be very useful is when there is a lot of constant damage pressure, for example on River of Souls. Healing Spring, on the other hand, gives you access to more condition cleanse outside of CA. It can be very good on condition-heavy fights, such as Sloth, Largus, or Soulless Horror, or fights where you need on-demand Condi cleanse, such as Doom. Worth noting is also that Healing Spring is a water field and pulses regeneration in addition to pulsing Condi cleanse. Water Spirit allows you to upkeep 100% Vigor uptime. Your only other source of Vigor is your Pet F2 through the Invigorating Bond trait, and you only get 50% uptime from that at most. However, Vigor isn't important enough to warrant using Water Spirit over the other two heal skills, but some DPS classes benefit from Vigor uptime in a way that allows them to do more DPS, so do humor them if they cry for it. If you're bringing Healing Spring or Water Spirit, you will need another glyph to upkeep permanent protection. In 90% cases, that will be Glyph of Equality. Its insane CC out of CA, as well as the stability it provides, makes it the most valuable glyph out of your utility skills. But on bosses that don't have break bars and where you don't need stability, you can consider running Glyph of Tides or Glyph of Unity. Glyph of Tides is an AoE knockback outside of CA. You will need it on Soulless Horror for pushing the Tormented Dead, and it can be useful on Veil Guardian for Seeker Control. You can also bring it on Samarug for pushing Regum, although there it is also viable to bring Longbow, as you don't need staff with such low damage pressure, and Equality provides so much more CC than Tides. Inside CA, Tides is an AoE pool instead, but it has such a low range that it's not very useful for grouping adds on bosses like Sloth or Conjured Amalgamate. You should make a Mesmer do that. Glyph of Unity, when used in CA, increases your healing done to others. while damaging the boss for every hit you take when used outside of CA. You can use it in CA on high damage pressure encounters such as River of Souls or Deimos CM to maximize your healing output. When used outside of CA, it can help with CA generation on bosses where you don't have anything to heal, like the first couple phases of Sabatha, but do remember it will hit only when you get hit, so walk into some damage, but make sure you don't die. If you're bringing Glyph of Rejuvenation as your heal skill, you can, but don't have to, run something else than a Glyph in your third utility slot. Here are your options. Frost Spirit will provide resistance and resolution, which prove invaluable when dealing with conditions such as chill, which makes your cooldowns go slower, or slow, which makes your cast times slower. Common places where you would encounter those would be Matthias and Merced Overseer respectively. I personally prefer to spam Conde cleanses on Matthias to bring equality for CC and stability, but on MO there isn't really anything useful to bring anyway, so I highly recommend Frost there. Guard is a skill that not many people know about. It redirects part of the damage you and 4 other people take onto your pet, and therefore it's incredibly useful in situations where you're dealing with a lot of constant damage pressure, like River of Souls. The damage mitigation will help you keep people alive when your CA and your staff skills are on cooldown. Keep in mind, however, that Garrett doesn't work against all damage. It will work on the taking damage on River of Souls, but it won't work on the taking damage from orange tiles on MO. Search and Rescue will command your pet to teleport a downed ally to you and start reviving them. You won't see this skill used practically at all by more experienced druids, but it can help you save people you failed to keep alive if you're still learning. Another use for it is during fights where certain mechanics can down people in one hit, and your group keeps getting hit by them, for example on Zamorak CM. But honestly, there are more useful skills to bring there. Storm Spirit does the same CC as Glyph of Equality, but unlike Equality, doesn't provide stability, is not a stun break, and doesn't provide protection. Yes, you can double the amount of CC it provides by bringing Nature's Vengeance Trait, but it takes forever to go off, and no breakbar should take that long. Plus, taking Nature's Vengeance only further decreases your protection generation, so it's pretty much never worth it. Muddy Terrain is an AoE that can be cast from high range, which pulses Cripple and Slow and immobilizes. It's a good source of ranged CC as long as you don't already have a source of those conditions. It can also be helpful in encounters where you need to immobilize a lot, like on Escort for the Wargs or on Deimos for the Prides. Keep in mind, however, that you don't need it to immobilize on those encounters, because one of your pets, Jacaranda, already fulfills this purpose on its own. You should consider Muddy Terrain more of an alternative solution to the problem rather than a necessity. Signet of Stone grants you additional toughness as its passive and a few seconds of invulnerability on cast. If you're a beginner tank and still learning how to tank high pressure bosses, you can bring it as your emergency button to prevent your own downstate, but consider it more training wheels than an actually useful skill. Now, traits. In the beginner guide, I told you to run Cultivated Synergy for more healing, but you're actually very flexible in your trait choice here. On condition-heavy fights, you can bring Druidic Clarity for more Conde cleanse, or further increase your CC output for Blood Moon, which will daze upon entering CA. You need Verdant Etching for protection, and Grace of the Land for alacrity, so you will always have those. Moving on to nature magic, Wellspring gives you a lot of healing power, so generally you should always keep it, and helps you with your regeneration uptime. As for Windburn nodes, Spirited Arrival is more might, but technically you don't need it unless you're not running a Warhorn. I personally prefer Windburn nodes since it makes your opener smoother, since you will apply initial regeneration together with other boons Call of the Wild provides. But if you find yourself struggling with might uptime or swap Warhorn out for another weapon, do run Spirited Arrival instead. Now, as I previously explained, marksmanship value comes from the lesser Call of the Wild and the CC buff from Moment of Clarity. You cannot drop the straight line on Soulless Horror because you need Lead the Wind for your longbow to pierce to be able to push the Tormented Dead. You also shouldn't drop it on Statue of Darkness, where the increased stun duration is more relevant than ever. But if you're a beginner tank and finding yourself dying a lot, you can sacrifice your boon generation for a wilderness survival, which will serve as training wheels. You can also use it on encounters where boons don't matter as much, such as River of Souls. Your minor traits allow you to dodge more often, get protection when you dodge, and receive ticking healing when you have protection. On top of that, you take reduced damage when you have regeneration due to Occurred Self, gain personal stability on pet swap from Shared Anguish, and split your condition durations with your pet due to Emphatic Bond. Before we move on to gear, let's quickly go over useful pets. Electric Wyvern and Rogue Gazelle have a lot of CC both in their auto-attack chain as well as on the active F2 skill. The Gazelle one has a slightly shorter cooldown, while the Wyvern one produces a lightning field which people can use leap finishers in for more CC. You can run both of these pets on bosses that require a lot of CC, or pick one of them. An alternative to one of them is Eder Hunter, which does the same amount of CC on its F2 skill, but doesn't have any CC in its rotation. Iboga also deals quite a bit of CC on its active, although not as much as the other 3 pets. Its active skill is a single target pull, which can be useful to pull in a stray add-on Kadim, help control Rigom on Samarug, or help pull the minis in Wing 6 sorting an appraisal section. White Tiger grants Aegis to 5 people on its active skill, which can be used to block certain mechanics, such as Gorzaval slams, KC jump, CA slams, or Deimos pizza. But keep in mind, the cooldown is pretty long, so sometimes you will need to alternate it with Stone Spirit. Jacaranda's active skill applies a long-lasting Immobilize, which makes it very useful on encounters like Deimos and Escort. Sage Turtle provides a projectile-destroying bubble around the pet on its active skill, which can prove useful to lower the damage pressure from the worms on Soulless Horror, or protects your squad from the hands on Adina. But remember to control your pet positioning so that the bubble spawns on top of the group and not in Naranja. Brown Bear is your other option for Condi clans outside of CA, somewhat of an alternative to Healing Spring. It can be used on Doom for the Soul Split, though remember to swap to Brown Bear after the knockback so that the pet is right on top of you. While on the topic of Doom, you can bring Fire Wyvern there. Its active skill produces a fire field which will deal a lot of damage and apply a lot of burning, which works wonders for the spiders your DPS players obviously didn't clear. Iboga deals enough AoE Condi damage to fulfill this role as well. Smoke Scale is a pet you bring to make your mirages happy. Its active skill produces a smoke field, and their rotation contains finishers which will result in more confusion and therefore more damage. Additionally, the smoke field can be blasted for stealth. If you can't think of any useful pets to bring, for example on Karen or Morsat Overseer, you can always bring Lynx for more personal DPS. It does a lot of bleeding on its active skill and is your highest DPS pet. One last pet worth mentioning is Wolf, which fears on its active skill. If you find yourself doing towers on Escort as a druid, you can use this pet as a backup for when Glyph of Tides isn't enough. Finally, I would like to introduce 2 more gear templates and a few useful weapons to you. In the beginner guide, I showed you a tanking template which mixes Giver and Minstrel pieces. However, if you're willing to spend gold on concentration infusions, you can switch more Giver pieces to Minstrel for more vitality and better survivability. The really important template you want to get to is the Mesmer Runes template. You essentially take your Harrier template and replace Monk Runes with Mesmer Runes. The runes will significantly increase your day's duration, allowing you to deal even more CC. I recommend running this on Samarug as well as Sabir and Sloth. Keep in mind, however, that you will be sacrificing some boon duration for this, especially if you don't have concentration infusions. Both these builds, as well as the one mentioned in the beginner guide, are linked in the description. As for weapons, remember that your main hand axe is mostly a filler. You don't particularly need it. That means you can replace it with sword, which can be useful since Pounce and Serpent Strike give you a lot of mobility. If you're crazy enough to play Druid on Harvest Temple CM, I would strongly recommend running sword there. Additionally, Serpent Strike is an evade, which you can use to dodge boss attacks when tanking, for example Zera's Blooded Frenzy or Veil Guardian Blues. To bring any other useful weapons, you will need to make a choice between dropping either a staff or a Warhorn. This is often a very difficult choice and will depend on your group. You shouldn't drop staff on high pressure fights since you need the healing from it, like on Solace Horror. On low pressure fights, such as Samarug, it's okay to drop it, but keep in mind you will struggle greatly to generate CA without it if you have another healer, so it's advisable to solo heal in such cases. Dropping Warhorn, on the other hand, will make it much more difficult to upkeep the boons you need to provide. You can still upkeep Fury through taking Spirited Arrival and swapping pets off cooldown, but your might generation will suffer and you will be more reliant on other people in your squad to provide it. Furthermore, Lesser Call of the Wild will be your only source of swiftness and it won't be permanent. On top of that, you will need to pay attention to applying enough regeneration through other means, such as your heal skill and Sublime Conversion. But what weapons can be useful? Longbow is necessary for you to push the Tormented Dead on Solace Horror with point blank shot, and it can also be used for pushing Regum on Samarug. Axe Offhand helps you pull adds on bosses like Sloth and Zera with Path of Scars, and while you already have it, you might as well use Whirling Defense for blocking projectiles. Hammer is a great choice on Samarug for even more CC on Overbearing Smash and Thump, since you don't really need the healing from staff there. Shortbow provides you with a lot of ranged CC through Concussion Shot and Crippling Shot, and can prove useful on Kadim the Peerless for dealing with anomalies if you're struggling to control your pets correctly to send them to CC. Lastly, Greatsword has a channeled block, which can serve as good training wheels for tanking and has some niche uses like trying to handkite on Deimos CM. If you managed to get through this entire guide, congratulations! You now know what Druid is capable of. Make sure to check out my other guides in the series, and as always, if you have any questions, drop my Discord or my stream and I'll be happy to help.